The Battle of Aliwal, fought on the 28th of January 1846, proved to be a turning point in the First Anglo-Sikh War. A bloody cavalry charge by the 16th Lancers broke the Sikh infantry squares, before combining with the British artillery and infantry to deliver what their commander, Sir Harry Smith, called his complete victory. So what actually happened in that charge by the 16th Lancers? It's time to explore the Battle of Aliwal, 1846. Welcome to part 3 of my series on the Anglo-Sikh Wars, which were fought in the 1840s. Now, I've covered the background to the war in my very first episode about the Battle of Mudki, so I won't go over it all over again. That battle at Mudki, fought on the 18th of December 1845, and the follow-up at Ferozeshah 3 days later, were inconclusive. The British had won, but goodness only knows how, losing as many men as the Sikhs, as General Sir Hugh Gough insisted on using a bayonet charge against Sikh cannon. But the Sikhs were far from finished. They simply recrossed the Sutlej further upriver at Sabrown, where the Sikh commander, Tej Singh, set about fortifying his bridgehead. Meanwhile, he ordered another army under Rajat Singh, an aristocratic general, to cross the river and advance on the British fort at Ludhiana, cutting Gough's supply line. Realising the danger, Gough sent General Sir Harry Smith to counter the threat. Like Gough, the 58-year-old Smith was a Napoleonic War veteran. As a young officer, he'd served in the Peninsular War, including the bloody storming of Badajoz. It was there that he came across a teenage Spanish girl, whom he rescued from the French, and later married. In later life, when Smith became governor of the Cape Colony, a settlement in South Africa was named after her, and it became the site of a famous siege during the Boer War. Lady Smith. There's also a town named after her husband as well in South Africa, Harry Smith. The son of a Cambridgeshire surgeon, General Smith was popular with his men. Now, maybe it was his rough and ready wit, or his energy, or his willingness to lead from the front, as he had done at the recent Battle of Ferozeshah. Or maybe it was because of his habit of appearing beside his men's fires at night and calling out, "Trumpeter, order a round of grog, and not too much water." In the early hours of the 16th of January 1846, Smith's column left Gough's camp, heading for Ludhiana. Setting off at his usual punishing speed, his column started to string out. And as the tail end of his long column passed Badawal 5 days later, it came under fire from Sikh artillery positioned to their left. Private, later Sergeant John Pearman, saw a cannonball hit Harry Greenbank in the head. He went on, "He was my front rank man, and his brains nearly covered me. I had to scrape them off my face and out of my eyes." Despite his keenness to do battle, Smith knew he was outnumbered and his men exhausted. He needed to get them to Ludhiana to rest and wait for reinforcements who were marching in from Delhi. He therefore ordered his column to move away from the guns and continue on their way. The stragglers were left to the mercy of the Sikh cavalry. Most were killed, although some Bengali troops were taken prisoner. Smith and the bulk of his column finally reached Ludhiana, where they were welcomed by the garrison commander, Colonel Godby. A few days later, Brigadier Wheeler arrived with his brigade from Delhi, comprising the British 50th Regiment of Foot, the 48th Bengal Native Infantry, and the Sirmoor Gurkhas. And to this force, Smith now added Colonel Godby's men of the 36th Bengal Native Infantry and the Naziri Gurkhas. His force was further enlarged when further reinforcements arrived from Gough in the form of another battery of guns and the 16th Queen's Own Lancers. Officially at this stage in their regimental history, they were the 16th, the Queen's, Regiment of Light Dragoons Lancers. Now, as that's a bit of a mouthful, I'm going to refer to them in this story as the 16th Queen's Lancers, which actually became their name in 1861. They were commanded by Major John Rowland Smythe. Towering at over 6 foot, this popular officer also had a controversial past. Back in 1831, he'd been committed to prison for killing his opponent in a duel in Ireland the previous year. So popular was Smythe in his regiment that rather than being dismissed, he was actually given leave of absence for the period of his jail sentence before rejoining the regiment. He'd later end his career as a lieutenant general. Sir Harry Smith's force was now 12,000 strong with 28 guns. Originally, his intention was to retrace his steps to Budawal, where the Sikhs attacked his column, but his scouts now informed him that Ranjit Singh had withdrawn his forces closer to the fords that he'd use to cross the Sutlej River. On the 28th of January 1846, he found the Khalsa army waiting for him near the village of Aliwal. The Sikhs occupied an entrenched position along a 4-mile ridge between the villages of Bundri on the British left and Aliwal on their right. To the rear was the Sutlej River. Now, it made a strong defensive position, but the river to their rear also meant that the Khalsa would find it difficult to withdraw too. Ranjit Singh, however, was confident that no withdrawal would be necessary, as he had more than enough troops and guns to defeat the British. He too had received reinforcements, including more guns and infantry, including the crack Avitabili regiment. Trained to European standards by Italian Napoleonic War veteran General Paolo Avitabili, they were more than a match for the British regulars or the East India Company's troops. Ranjit Singh's army now stood at 20,000, nearly twice the size of the army that Sir Harry Smith had brought to the fight. He also possessed an artillery of 67 guns, compared to Smith's 28. Despite that disadvantage, Sir Harry Smith deployed his army with almost textbook-like precision, placing his cavalry on the flanks. The 16th Queen's Lancers and the 3rd and 4th Bengal Native Cavalry or Lancers were on the left, and the remainder were on the right. The latter included the 1st Bengal Native Cavalry as well as the Governor-General's bodyguard, which incidentally still exists today as the President of India's bodyguard. In between the cavalry, he arranged his 4 infantry brigades and the guns. The infantry brigades were mixed between British regulars and local Indian sepoy troops. The regular regiments from the British Army present that day were the 31st Regiment of Foot, later the East Surreys and now the Princess of Wales Royal Regiment, the 50th Regiment of Foot, later the West Kents and now also part of the Princess of Wales Royal Regiment, and the 53rd Foot, later the King's Shropshire Light Infantry and now part of the Rifles. They were joined by 4 sepoy regiments, the 24th, the 36th, the 47th and the 48th Bengal Native Infantry, and 2 battalions, the Nasiri and the Sirmur, from the Gurkhas. The 47th Bengal Native Infantry are now the 3rd Battalion, the Rajput Regiment, in the Indian Army, whilst the Nasiri are now part of the 1st Gurkhas Regiment, also of the Indian Army. In 1947, upon Indian independence, the Sirmur Gurkhas transferred to the British Army. The battle began with Smith ordering his guns to open fire. The Sikh artillery replied, but the ensuing artillery duel didn't achieve very much. Having observed his opponents, Smith concluded that the Sikhs' weak spot was the village of Aliwal on his right, and decided to drive them out and then roll up the Sikh line. Advancing through a ferocious fire and hand-to-hand fighting, Brigadier Godfrey, with a mixed brigade of Sepoys, Gurkhas and the 31st Regiment of Foot, broke through into the village. They now laid down enfilade fire, which is firing into the side of the rest of the Sikh line. Ranjit Singh now launched his cavalry to drive them back, but they were met by a countercharge by the Indian cavalry units out there on the right, under Brigadier Stedman. Just as things were starting to look good for Sir Harry, he suddenly noticed more Sikh cavalry advancing on his left flank. He ordered the 16th Lancers and the 3rd Native Cavalry to ride against them. The ferocity of the 16th Lancers shattered the Sikh horsemen, and then the British Lancers turned and rode at the Sikh infantry. Having been trained by European mercenaries like Paolo Avitabili, the Sikh infantry, dressed in European-style uniforms, armed like European soldiers, now used a European tactic to face the British cavalry. They formed a series of squares. As the 16th galloped towards the bristling wall of Sikh bayonets, Sergeant Harry Newsom on a grey charger shouted, "Here goes death or a commission," and forced his horse through the front ranks. As he leaned down to grab a Sikh standard, his body was pierced by 19 bayonets. Nevertheless, his mad death or glory charge had forced a gap in the Sikh square, and his comrades exploited it. But even with their square formation broken, the Sikhs refused to give ground. Sergeant William Gould recalled the ferocity of the fighting in those squares. By the time his squadron had ridden to the far side of the square, they had lost 3 officers, the sergeant major and 2 sergeants. He was the most senior rank and only sergeant left. Meanwhile, Corporal Cowton's squadron lost 42 men in the fighting. One of his sergeants, by the name of Brown, was brought down, and before he hit the ground, he had received at least a dozen slashes from the Sikhs' razor-sharp sabres. The losses for the British cavalry were more severe than a veteran present had seen fighting the French in the Peninsular War. Even their commander, Major Smythe, took a bayonet in his abdomen. As the 16th rode out of the shattered squares, the Bengal Horse Artillery galloped forward, unhitched their guns and blasted at the men of the Avatabili. With Smith's infantry now moving up in support, with Smith himself leading the 50th Regiment with their colours unfurled, the fighting descended into a bloody melee. But his combined use of cavalry, artillery and infantry was proving decisive. The 53rd Regiment of Foot proceeded to clear the last Sikh defenders out of Bundari before advancing towards the river. Alongside them, the 30th Bengals now moved towards a dried riverbed, a nullah, where the Khalsa infantry were making yet another stand. Manoeuvring to the end, they then filled the nullah with enfilade fire, forcing the Sikhs out into the open, right in front of the Bengal Horse Artillery. A dozen guns now let rip with grape shot. With their flanks being turned by the British cavalry and their front being pushed back by the infantry and artillery, the Khalsa were forced to retreat back across the Sutlej River, sustaining heavy casualties in the process. The Battle of Aliwal was over. After the inconclusive battles at Mudki and Ferozeshah, Smith had won a clear victory. But it had come at a high price. 141 of his men lay dead, and a further 414 wounded. Nearly a third of those casualties, 140, were from the 16th Lancers. Their charge at Aliwal went down as one of the great cavalry charges in the British Army's history. The 16th Queen's Lancers are now the Queen's Royal Lancers. A squadron of that regiment still crimp their lance pennants as a reminder of the blood that stiffened on them on that day way back in 1846. And interestingly, one of the 16th officers who survived that day was Lieutenant William Morris, who, 10 years later, would command the 17th Lancers during the charge of the Light Brigade. Sikh losses were maybe up to 2,000 dead, although some Sikh historians dispute that figure. What was certain, however, was they had lost 60 of their 67 guns and had been pushed back across the Sutlej. Smith had protected Ludhiana and, more importantly, had kept the supply road open. Fresh troops and artillery could now join Gough for his push into the Punjab. So from that perspective, it was definitely a turning point in the war. Oh, and for the first time in this war, the Sikhs hadn't been undone by lacklustre or treacherous leadership. It had been a soldier versus soldier fight, and Smith's army had won. The jubilant Smith wrote in his diary, "Never was a victory more complete." As you can see, modesty wasn't one of his virtues. Unlike Gough, who had a love for a bloody bayonet charge, this victory had been achieved by Smith's use of his artillery, infantry and cavalry to support each other as they advanced on the Sikh lines. And that approach was noted by none other than the Duke of Wellington, who in the House of Lords praised Smith, saying, "Never has an officer shown himself more capable than this officer did of commanding troops in the field." From the Duke of Wellington, that's praise indeed. Smith now marched his army to rejoin General Gough. Arriving as an elated Gough, called for his whole army to give 3 cheers for the gallant gentlemen of Aliwal. With that Smith victory at Aliwal and reinforcements on the way, Gough now planned his next move. And it wouldn't be long in coming. So join me next time for the final showdown between the British and the Sikhs in this war at the Battle of Sobraon. Now, if you're interested in supporting my show, then please click on the links in the description below. It's thanks to the support of people like Donald, Audrey and Daryl that I'm able to devote so much time to researching and then producing these episodes. Thanks for joining me today. Keep well, and I'll see you again very soon.